Well, I'm getting that overwhelming feeling again. A lot of stuff on the bench and a lot to do. And a couple of saws came in. I think I showed some on Cameo on one of my other videos. And looks more and more to me like a straight gas event, because the color on those crankshafts show that this got very, very, very hot. You can see how it got hot up in the connecting rod, which means that bearing was being starved for lubrication. Of course it failed, right? From the same outfit, that one must have run a little bit longer because it's got even more bluing, but it too failed. So I have two wrecked 372s. See how blue they got in there? This one's even worse. Makes you think of that song Blue Bayou, because these suckers are done. And obviously the bearings failed, so they no longer can perform their function. And the problem when you get a bearing failure like that is pieces go everywhere and destroy other things. But the other thing that happens is now there's motion this way. The piston goes up and smacks the combustion chamber around the squish band. But there's bits of bearing and bits of other things embedded into the top of that piston. So I consider that a complete failure. Oh, by the way, this is a junk pile build. The other piston, I don't know. Could probably clean it up and use it, I suppose. See how the rings are on it. The rings aren't bad. What do you think? It didn't get impacted up here. I got to clean some of that out of there, but I think that piston's usable. I have a backup in case it isn't. So this is a junk pile build, but I'm also going to expand a little further into the differences between the original edition 372s and the current edition X-Torq. So we had talked last time about the cases. And seeing as I have these two blown up saws, it's an excellent time to get down inside and start looking at, you know, some of the different pieces and parts. Now, as we had said last video, the depth of that recess is the significant difference in the cases, because the flange at the base of the cylinders on the X-Torqs is longer. It has a bunch of other stuff going on, but the distance from this sealing surface to here is, I don't know, quite a bit larger than the original edition ones. And we briefly looked at some of the differences in the cylinders. I mean, you can obviously see the difference on the intake, but also take a look at the difference in height. Look at that. It's a much heavier part. X-Torqs have got those caps on the transfers. The exhaust is the same. But look at the difference in height, because that also brings up a few significant issues for the designers to work around. This is an X-Torq cover, and it has the decomp in the very top. It's also quite a bit taller than the original edition covers to accommodate that taller cylinder, right? So not only do they have a decomp in the different place, these got them up here, and the original edition has them on the side. So the top cover has to accommodate both the taller height of the cylinder, but also the different location of the decomp. So that's different, which means since now the saw is taller, the handlebars are now taller to accommodate that, but also the chain brake handles are taller. There's more distance to here on the chain brake handles to accommodate the taller cylinder, necessitating the taller plastic. So just a lot of things are different from one saw to the next. But in addition to the different cases with a different recess, the taller cylinder, the X-Torq versus the original edition, you get things like the filter holder is going to be different one from the next. The X-Torques have got that divider in there. And if you notice, the screw orientations are different as well. The boots are different. That's original edition. I don't know if you can see in there, but obviously it has to accommodate the divider right there. Diameter is larger, and of course it has the 2 passages. So filter holder, carburetor, intake boot, all different. And the root cause is right there. That's an original edition piston. That's actually a 371 single ring piston. And there's your X-Torque. And see that difference in height? There's your fundamental reason, because they have to accommodate the X-Torque feature with a taller piston. That's why the X-Torque saws are taller and heavier and all that stuff. So there's just a lot of differences, you know. It's really not a straightforward change to convert torque back to original edition. Now, you cannot build an X-Torque on the original edition cases because that recess is not enough. So that's not going to happen. And who'd want to anyway? You know, not to get ahead of myself. But you can take X-Torque cases and then put all the top end parts from the original edition on those cases. Which means you got to do the cylinder, obviously, boot, carburetor, filter holder. And yeah, I suppose you can run the taller plastic and that's not going to hurt anything because you just have more space above there. But to make it really right, you'd have to change the handle, the chain brake handle, and the top cover. A lot of guys didn't. A lot of guys just basically stuck, you know, like an XPW top end on top of these cases and just changed the intake parts plus the cylinder and piston. But I'm not sure what the implications are in cooling, but I suspect there's some. Now here's an original edition carburetor, one versus the other. See how much larger that bore is on the X-Torques? That's what an original edition boot looks like. Just lots and lots of stuff. That's different, that's different, that's different. The clamp's different, cylinder's different, the piston's different, top cover is different. Now, one thing I've seen also really subtle, and that's in the cranks. And I'm not really sure whether it matters. But see the X-Torque crank in there? It's got that little chamfer on the pin. There's an original edition crank. So I don't really know if it's the design change or is that to offset some of the weight difference between the, you know, the pistons. I really can't tell you. But I have noticed there's a slight difference in these pins. The part number hasn't changed, but there's a difference there. My hunch is using an old style crank probably will make it vibrate a little bit more. How much more I can't tell you, but that's my hunch. They probably changed the weight just ever so slightly to balance it out. And that's pure speculation, I can't tell you. I'm just noticing that difference right there though. So anyway, let me get rid of some of this stuff, shut the camera off. And while we're on the subject of differences, there's a couple of other subtle things because of all the changes in the intake. The choke lever is different. And because of the way the saw is set up, the ignition system is different. The X-Torque ignition systems are rev limited to 13.3. And over the years they've made some updates on that to change the timing curve to make it easier to start, you know, the advanced curve. So there's some subtle differences there as well. Just the bottom line is just a lot of changes between the two saws. They're really completely different designs. And the X-Torque's way more because of all that extra stuff. Almost by a pound. Now there's a fellow who spends an awful lot of time trying to convince me that the nylon cage bearings are a benefit, not a liability. So I think we're going to do a little experiment. Since they have survived and I'm not seeing any sign of damage on them, and they feel smooth, we're going to leave it right alone. Put it right back together with those nylon cage bearings. And then we're going to take the other set of cases where the bearings are in fact destroyed, because they are destroyed. You can't hardly turn, they seized right up. Yeah, and the cages started coming apart on those. We're going to put steel cage bearings in the other set of cases. We're going to send both these saws back to the logger and see which one comes back first. You know, I'm kind of tired of hearing about this, you know. Start doing a quantitative test to see which one works. Obviously, it's just a test of two saws, but that combined with a few years of repairs, we might be able to get a trend here. If nothing else, it'll be amusing. The thing is, when a saw gets to be this far gone, I feel like I have latitude. Yeah, I think we're just going to put this stuff right back together. This stuff doesn't have a lot of time on it. These bearings and the seals and stuff like that, they have less than a year. So basically all these things are right here. It's just taking the Husqvarna shop tool and putting a handle on it. That's all I did. That was the inspiration. You know, they have the hex on the back, and instead of having that, you know, I wanted to have a handle. And they're nice enough to give me the thread, M14 by 1.25, you know, reverse is what that one is. And this is M8 by 1 millimeter standard, you know. So that's all that is. Now, what I have decided to do on this particular set of cases is I don't like the seal tension. When I put it in this bushing right here, you know, on that seal, I want to have a little bit of tension. There isn't much. So I'm going to put a new seal in there. Now you got to be a little careful when you use brute force tools like this right here, because if you go a little too far, you'll actually score the case. So that seal is out, and there really was nothing wrong with it except for I didn't like it. And it gives me a chance to look inside that bearing a little more too. See, I want to make sure that that nylon cage has not, you know, degraded in any way that I can tell, you know what I'm saying? Before I even think about putting this together. Now, the other thing is, when you put another seal in, this is this tool right here makes it kind of easy because it slides over the crank, and it only goes so far in, it won't let it go too far. So I'm going to use this tool to install the next seal. Well, I cleaned it up a little bit. There's a little chunk of metal in the back there that I picked out. Brushed it up with a little bit of wet dry. Again, this is a junk pile build. I think part of what you have to get through your head, or at least I do, is as a hobbyist, I want my saw to be perfect. You know? I want everything to be just right. But these guys, they just want them to run. They don't have to be just right. They just got to keep running. I think part of the lesson of this incident here is even OEM is going to fail. If it's in a rough enough environment. You know, I guess that's a polite way of saying if they're abused enough. So, you know, the game here just simply is to make it where it'll cut wood and hopefully cut wood for long enough to pay for itself, pay for the repair. And anything past that is profit. You know? None of the stuff is great shape. All the stuff is pretty beat up. The game here is to stick it back together and let's just see how long it runs. And you try to be as careful as you can, you know? You don't want to be sloppy. But if the components are reasonably good, and they're put together with reasonable care, they're going to probably run long enough to, you know, earn some money for the guy. And he's going to be happy. That's it. I had to go wash my hands before I get into this operation. I want to keep things as clean as I can. You know. I'll wipe a little oil on the inside of these things. On the way down, I get the pulse line on. You start pulling it through. On there, I'm going to get the throttle cable put in just like that. Settle that down. There we go. And hook in the carb anti-vide mount right down the bottom there. Put on the pulse line, so that's on. There we go. Set that right down there. See how that has to capture the partition. Alright, let's get the alright. Little rubber button goes right in there. Okay, so it's got a new seal. Yeah, but really the top end I just cleaned up and put back together. The main bearings I cleaned up, and they were smooth. They didn't look like they had damage. You know, one thing that I'm really curious about carb settings. What were the carb settings on this saw? There's that mark. So is it possible? See, there's a mark right there. So 1. No, it wasn't that. I think this thing was straight gassed. I don't think it was carb issue at all. Low speed. 1. Yeah. Well, that carb was set right. I mean, usually you're seeing like 1 1/8, 1 1/2 out on the high speed, and that's exactly what that was. So this was not someone monkeying around with this. Whatever killed the saw, I believe it was lubrication related. So, let me get rid of that thing. That's the tank vent. I don't know, goes there. Throttle cable's on. I got the ignition kill switch wire out. Might as well put the ignition on at this point, right? Now I've got a couple of ignitions. One of the issues that you have with the X-Torqs is the wire, that one right there, tends to rub against the cylinder. Now there's been some revisions in the ignition systems, and this is one of the later ones right here, 2016. The later versions have a slightly different advance curve than the other versions from the other X-Torqs. That one's beginning to cut in there, so if I can use one of these other ones, I think I will. But this one here is the late version. See, it has a whole different number. The older version looks like this, and it has the 13,000. I think this one actually had come out of a 390. I think both of these are 390s. Because the X-Torq saws would have 13.3 there instead of 13,000 for the limiting RPM. Use my steel shop tool, and basically that's to space the ignition coil from the flywheel magnet. Now another little piece that has to go in there before we start putting covers on is this guy right here. Make sure everything turns nice and free. It does. The little top hat, there's a little spacer right here. It's like a bushing. Goes this way, like that. Going on somewhere. Before I put the cover on, I gotta get rid of that. Sometimes I'll actually just chop a little bit of the fins off in order to give it clearance. Just make sure there is oil in and around that seal. Second thing is, and a lot of people forget this, there's a little tiny O-ring that goes in there. I guess it's a little debatable on how much that actually does. And there's a lot of famous name builders who'll tell you, just leave it out. Well, why? You know, it was designed to be there in my mind. And what it does, it gets right in between this and the bearing and takes away one potential leak. Push that right down in there. Now there's a thin washer that goes down in there too. If I can find one. There it is. This right here. It somewhat shields the bearing, I guess, from the worm gear. The worm gear gets down in there. Cannot forget the oil line. This guy right here has to pick up line. Drops right down in there. Cannot forget that little piece right there. And it's easier to work with this if you've tripped the chain brake. Kind of a little trick. Because with the chain brake trip, there's more room to work this, you know. Just kind of get it up in there. There. And then it goes right in the top like that. And it goes like that. So there is an order of events there that actually makes a difference. That goes on the end. That's that little seal. Goes like that. Now one of the things I do on these, I'll clean these screws. A little bit of carb clean. And if you notice on these, oftentimes they have a little bit of a nylock on there. And if you're lucky, you can find two that way. Mine didn't. Mine came out some with and some without, so that's something the Husky decided wasn't necessary, obviously. But I think it's important to make sure you seal up those holes, because those holes are directly into the crankcase. So by making sure they're sealed, you've yet again eliminated a path for a leak. So if they don't have a nylock, I put a little bit of this stuff on there. Like that.